To rehash a little bit of what we talked about yesterday, the First World War, obviously a disaster. The war to end all wars, which in the post-war years means that nations are now going to start moving to set up organizations, to set up treaties, to set up diplomatic relations that will allow them to avoid the next major conflict. And I think I mentioned the other day, we have to remember as students of history that we know a lot more than they knew in their time, okay? So as we talk through today in our next class, we might do like some head scratching at how could these guys not see what was coming, but it's so much easier for us to see what was coming because it came and we know about it. They don't know, okay? All they know is war is hell and war is to be avoided at all costs, all right? So we're going to talk about some themes of maybe the pre-World War I years and then compare them to the themes of maybe the post-World War I years. What kinds of things would we throw out there? Pre-World War I, what kinds of things are going on internationally? What kind of themes are maybe dictating how nations are being ruled? Yes, ma'am? Okay, nationalism is on the rise. Both the nationalism of Germany and France and Britain, for example, of our country, should be a dominant power, and the nationalism of those Bosnian Serbs that possibly demanded or would fight for a country of their own. Nationalism, yes?
Neo-imperialism.
Okay, imperialism. This new imperialism of the 19th century where countries wanted to expand and they had to beat their rivals in Europe to those places. So countries would butt heads with regard to that. Yeah?
In the vein of imperialism, more countries were trying to be self-sufficient, like whether by colonies or by expanding territory.
Okay, excellent. Countries gaining land because if they didn't gain overseas territory, other nations would do it, and then that other nation would have a leg up in terms of resources and markets to share. Post-World War I kind of themes are we looking at? Yeah, Jasmine. Tension? Okay. We're actually going to go with nations trying to alleviate a lot of that tension. There's going to be tension in the immediate post-war years, but countries trying to alleviate tension. We're going to be talking about how nations are, rather than being more nationalistic, they're going to try to look at the world from a more of an internationalist perspective. With something like the League of Nations that we'll talk about. Trying to talk with each other and make agreements and have diplomatic relations with other nations so they could avoid conflict. If pre-World War I was an era of militarism and growing military powers, post-World War I is an era where nations are going to do some negotiations to try to limit their militaries. You guys might remember from last year talking about the Washington Naval Conference, for example, where the great powers of the world got together and agreed to make some limits on their naval capabilities and stop construction of new battleships and such. There was also a movement towards more free markets and countries having more economic relationships with each other. With a little bit of a nod to what I think we recognize today, and certainly what our last couple presidents, our last few presidents have acknowledged, that countries that do business with each other tend to not go to war with each other. Okay, making the world more free market and making the world more connected economically can make the world a little bit more peaceful. There's some people that are concerned about China being a major rival to the United States or even a military rival to the United States, and I think there probably is some concern there. But there are very few people that think like any full-scale war will ever break out between the United States and China because we are each so tied to each other economically. We owe China so much money and we pay them so much money in interest every month that China, to go to war with us, would lose all that. And then we are so reliant on China, on all the fun things I've got sitting around me that help me teach my class, that I would certainly not advocate for that kind of conflict. So countries that are economically connected would be less likely to be militarily violent against each other. So the 1920s, nations are tired of war, okay? It's a pacifist era. Countries don't want to go to war anymore. Pre-1914, war makes your country better. War makes your men or boys men. War is generally a good thing. Post-1919, war is something to be avoided. Yes, sir?
I was just going to mention, of course, it does help. I mean, a good idea to mention that European powers haven't had a major conflict, obviously, since the Franco-Prussian War.
Which wasn't even that major.
You're right, and even before that, in the Napoleonic Wars.
Absolutely. So it was outside of people's lives. So people in 1913, people in early 1914 didn't really know what war was.
They thought it was still
People after World War I absolutely know. So after World War I, and I know I'm rehashing a little bit from the other day, after World War I, the League of Nations is going to be formed. This is one of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, and it's in fact the one of his 14 points that he was most desirous to have worked into the final agreement at the Paris Peace Conference. He was willing to compromise on a lot of his other beliefs in order to get the League of Nations established. So within the Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations is the beginning of it. The first articles of the Treaty of Versailles is the establishment of the League of Nations. Now, of course, what is the irony there with Woodrow Wilson coming up with the idea of the League of Nations? Very good. We don't join. Anybody? Why do we not join? Let me get one person so maybe the world can hear you. Emily. Very good, because we've got the Constitution that requires treaties to be ratified by the U.S. Senate, and Woodrow Wilson being a Democrat, the Senate in 1920 being majority Republican, not keen on joining the League of Nations, which might drag the United States into European conflict. And again, post-World War I, most Americans don't want to be dragged into any more European conflicts. So the United States will never actually ratify the Treaty of Versailles. The United States will never join the League of Nations. All right? So right off the bat, you've got one of the most powerful nations in the world, the fastest growing economy in the world, not in this new international organization. Despite that, the League of Nations is going to come to fruition. It's going to exist. And by in 1920, it's going to start with 48 nations. By 1929, it's going to grow to 54 nations, including Germany, which we'll mention in a couple minutes. Including Germany. Germany itself, which was not allowed into the League of Nations at the start, by 1926 will be admitted as a full member of the League of Nations.
Wasn't Russia admitted too?
Russia will eventually be admitted as well, absolutely. We're going to talk as well about the Locarno treaties. And this should be, you guys should remember hearing this last year. In 1925, in the aftermath of the Ruhr crisis, a little review from last year if you guys don't recall the Ruhr crisis. This is when Germany was unable to make their reparations payments to France and Belgium. And as a retribution for that, France invaded the Ruhr region of Germany. It's a border region. It's an industrially rich border region of Germany. France invaded the Ruhr region. And at this point, we've got this is 1923 into 1924. We've got Germany. Remember in 1919 at the Treaty of Versailles, how was Germany viewed by the victorious powers and most of the rest of the world in 1919? Guilty. They were made to sign the war guilt clause, right? The war was all their fault. Even if we could point a finger at Austria, and we can point a finger at Russia for mobilizing, and we can point a finger for Britain for jumping into the affairs, we can point some fingers at France because they have their own war plans put together, Germany is going to take the brunt of the blame. But now we're a few years removed from the war, right? And countries are trying to get back on their feet, and there's this spirit of internationalism. There's this spirit of internationalism that we're dealing with. And now France invades Germany. And it's going to start to tip the balance of sympathy away from the French, who people were feeling pretty sorry for at the end of World War I, towards the Germans. Wow, the Germans were really punished pretty hard. We took away a lot of their territory. We took away their overseas empire. We took away their military. They can only have a 100,000 man army. They can't have any air force. They're not allowed to have any navy anymore. They're forced to pay billions of dollars in reparations. Man, we were being tough on them. And now France is invading Germany again? And the rest of the world is going to look at France and say, France, come on, ease up. Give them a break. And we also have to remember, too, is the Germany of 1923, the Germany of 1924, is that the same Germany of 1914, 15, 16, 17, 18? No. How is it different? Okay, they're broke as a joke, sure, but let's look at the nation itself and the government, yes.
The Kaiser's abdicated.
The Kaiser abdicated the throne at the end of the war, right? They've got a brand new government, yes ma'am.
Also, they're split by, or Germany's split into two, like, states by the Polish corridor.
Ooh, we're skipping way ahead to, my bad, you are correct. So it is part of the land that they lost is going to create this Polish corridor for the nation of Poland to have access to the sea. So Germany is somewhat divided there. And what is the new German government called? Does anybody recall this? Look at you go. Yeah.
Oh, the Weimar Republic?
The Weimar Republic, because the new constitution was written up in the city of Weimar outside of Berlin. So it's not even really the same. It's akin to saying, is the United States the same country, or is America the same country in 1774 as we are in 1777? Or are we the same country when we were under the Articles of Confederation as under the Constitution? No, it's the same country, but it's completely different government, completely different set of rules, right? And Germany now has all of the guys that started the First World War, they're long gone. So there's more sympathy going out towards Germany. And we've got the spirit of internationalism, right? We want to do business with each other, and Germany should be a viable business partner. Prior to the war, Germany had the most successful economy on the European continent. Britain wants that to be put back together. France, they're nervous about Germany. America wants that to be put back together. Everybody wants to do business with Germany, except for France. France just wants to get paid. So by the Ruhr crisis, France starts to look bad, and Germany is getting more sympathy. So the Ruhr crisis will come to a resolution with some help from the United States, working out a payment plan, basically, that Germany can hop onto. But this is going to spur a meeting in Switzerland called the Locarno Conference. Locarno Conference, I guess. We get the Locarno treaties out of it. It's in Locarno, Switzerland. And this is a big deal, okay? It's in 1925, and essentially it is going to mean the normalization of relations with Germany between all of the participants. And we've got Germany is there, we've got France, we've got Britain, we've got Belgium, and we even let Italy go. Now, it's notable who's not there. Okay? Russia's not there. The United States is not there. And no Eastern European country is there. Okay, that's important to note. So we've got Germany, and we've got France, and we've got Britain, and we've got Belgium, and we've got Italy. And they meet at Locarno, and relations will be normalized. What that means is there won't be an official belligerent relationship anymore between, for example, France and Germany. They're going to have totally normalized relations. You're going to hear that word again later in the year when we talk about China and the United States, for example. Here's a couple of the agreements. First, Germany, Britain, Italy, France, and Belgium all officially agree to accept the borders of Western Europe as drawn up in the Treaty of Versailles. Now, this is a big deal for like one country to agree to this. The other four already did. Britain, France, Italy, Belgium, they were already cool with the new borders of Germany and the western portion. France took some land from Germany, or took land back from Germany. Belgium gained some land from Germany. So they were already cool with that. But Germany wasn't cool with the borders. Remember, Germany signed the Treaty of Versailles under duress, right? They didn't want to sign the Treaty of Versailles. They had to sign the Treaty of Versailles. So those borders, those western borders, will be solidified. Those western borders will be guaranteed. Those western borders will be accepted. And I said western, 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 which means I didn't say those borders, those eastern borders, the border between Germany and Poland, the borders between Germany and Czechoslovakia, those could still be in question. Those could still be up for negotiation. What does that say about how the Western powers felt about the newborn Eastern nations? Not a whole lot of consideration. Not a whole lot of consideration. And so it's going to give Germany some hope, maybe in the future, if there could be some expansion, it's going to come to the east. We'll keep that in mind, okay? They also, Germany, Britain, France, Italy, and Belgium, are going to agree not to go to war with each other. They will not go to war over any disputes they might have. They will only negotiate. And if any one of those 5 countries does go to war with another one of those 5 countries, the other 4 countries are supposed to join together and support to end that conflict. This is a guarantee of peace, for example, that France had long been looking for. France, before World War I, didn't have any such guarantee from a country like Britain. Britain was not obligated to defend France when Germany was invading. Why did Britain join World War I again? Because of neutral Belgium and Britain wanting to check German aggression and make sure Germany did not become a superpower on the continent. But they didn't have any obligation to the French. Now they do. But who should really be concerned about somebody here? Do you think France has, in 1925, when this is being written, does France have more worry about Germany, or does Germany have more worry about France? Yeah, I totally asked that in a way where I kind of gave the answer in the way I asked it. But why does Germany have so much more to worry about from France than the other way around? Jasmine? Okay, because France proved that they are being an aggressive power right now. Yeah?
Germany has no way to protect itself.
Why?
Because they took away the armies and naval powers from Germany
In the
treatment side.
Very good. And guys, I'm going to push you on these why questions, because the why is where you make your money on the IB exam, giving a reason. Okay, to say on an IB exam, to say in an essay, Germany couldn't defend itself. Okay, that's good. The grader will throw you a bone. But if to say on an exam, Germany couldn't defend itself because the Treaty of Versailles forced them to demilitarize to 100,000 men army and no navy and no air force, now you're making that reader very happy. Okay? So we always want to push ourselves on this is the analysis piece. This is like explaining why things are happening. So awesome. So now we've got this guarantee of peace. And if Germany is ever invaded, Britain's got to step up. If France is ever invaded, Britain's got to step up. We are going to call this time period the spirit, it's going to create what's known as the spirit of Locarno in newspapers and how, wow, we're making ground here. It's looking like we're not going to fight another big war. This is awesome. Let's make things even better. In 1928, a major international agreement will be signed, including this time the United States, called the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Kellogg, K-E-L-L-O-G-G, dash, like the cereal. I don't know if there's a family connection there. Someone can look that up and tell me later. Kellogg-Briand, B-R-I-A-N-D. It's an American guy and a French guy. It's probably Briand. Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1928. This is the one that often gets my students to kind of chuckle when they hear what it is. And you guys already know what it is from last year, I think you recall. Causes students to kind of chuckle when they hear what it is because we know what's going to happen a decade later. All right? But these guys didn't. Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1928 was 45 nations getting together and agreeing to not use war as a means to solve international disputes. Ha ha ha. Yeah, it sounds ridiculous now because we know what's going to happen not only 10 years later with Germany, but a couple years later with Japan and Manchuria. But they don't know that. So for them, how are the 20s feeling? We've created the League of Nations. Is the League of Nations successful in avoiding major international conflict? Absolutely, at that point. We've signed the Locarno Pact. Has the Locarno Treaty avoided major international conflict between these great powers of Europe? Absolutely, to that point. And now we've signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact. We've even brought the United States in on this one. And have we avoided major international conflict? Absolutely. Wow. Let's pat ourselves on the back for a great decade. All right? Now, the reality is, what kept people out of war in the 1920s? Was it these agreements? Or was it the realization of what war was, and people just didn't want to go there. Well, I think the 30s are going to prove that, okay? 1929, we have a stock market crash in New York City. Ushers in the Great Depression, not just in the United States, but around the world. Why does a stock market crash in New York City lead to an eruption of global markets? Yes?
Because the United States have been providing so much aid to the countries trying to rebuild the wall.
Awesome. Yeah. A lot of the plans that we worked out with Germany, like the Dawes plan, for example, to allow Germany to pay their bills, essentially had us loaning money to the Germans so the Germans could pay their bills to the British and the French and the Belgians. But now, with the Great Depression, we got to cut these loans. And in fact, we're going to call some of our loans in. We're going to say, hey, you got to start paying us back. This is a problem. And there's internationally connected markets. So just like a few weeks ago, when the Chinese stock market started to have a major crash, that rippled around us and was a disaster for American markets and European markets. Everybody's interconnected. So the Great Depression is going to start to change a lot of the themes of the 1920s. If the themes of the 1920s were internationalism and people kind of working together for common goals and having more free markets, do we understand what I mean when I say free markets? Okay, very good. I love it when kids are brave enough, they are the risk takers of the International Baccalaureate, to admit when they don't know something. It's hard to do in class, and I want you to do that. So if I say something that is not 100% crystal clear to you, please raise your hand and stop me, and I'd love to explain it. When we're talking free markets, a market is any place where goods and services are bought and sold, all right? A free market is a place that has limited or maybe even zero barriers to trade. You don't have to, if you just hear it, I think we're fine. A barrier to trade is anything that slows down trade, all right? Some are man-made, some are natural. Anybody think of some man-made barriers to trade? Yes, sir, Orion. Tariffs. A tariff, very good. Explain to the world what a tariff is.
Taxes on goods that are traded that in and out of the country, so that others will have to pay more for your stuff and you don't.
I think we're going to flip that around. It's a tax on just imported goods. So, for example, the United States might place a tariff on imported automobiles. So Japanese cars coming to the United States would now be more expensive than they should be, which would do what to American car buyers? Yes? It would probably make them want to buy American. These kinds of policies, like tariff policies, we call them protectionist policies, okay? Because you're trying to protect your own economy. You're trying to protect your own nation's businesses. But there's also a flip side to that coin. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, the flip side would be that, like, if you put tariffs on someone's imports to their country, they'll end up taxing your stuff that goes into their country.
Very good. So it's going to make it that much harder for us to sell goods in other countries. And then what's another negative of tariffs? What would it do to the American consumer, for example? Joey, say it out loud so people can hear. What's that? Why would it make them unhappy, Joey? Okay, or if I really want a Honda, it's more expensive for me and I'm not happy, right? And what do you think Ford and General Motors and Chrysler, well, Ford is now Italian, it's all confusing now, but back in the day, what do you think they would do to their prices if they knew that Japanese prices were artificially being risen 20%? They would probably raise their own prices, maybe not 20%, but they'd raise them. And so what happens to prices overall for consumers with tariffs? And they're going to go up. What's going to happen to automobile quality? It probably will go down because there's less competition. Or maybe Honda and Toyota begin to cut some corners in their products so they can keep their prices a little bit lower. So generally, they're not seen as a very good thing. But tariffs are something that countries sometimes impose, especially in times of economic crisis, and the United States is going to do just that. That is one major man-made trade barrier. Anyone think of another trade barrier that people create? Yes? An embargo. An embargo where we aren't selling to you, or we're not letting your stuff into our country. All right? Think of the United States' relationship with Cuba. over the last half century or more, which is now coming to an end. Any other man-made trade barriers that you guys can think of? Quotas? Anybody know what a quota is?
The amount of stuff you sell.
No, it's 1/4 of a dollar. No. Okay, a quota, that's a quarter. It's like a pun. All right. A quota is a limit. It's an artificially imposed limit that we might impose on a nation's imports. So we are only going to accept 20,000 cars a year from Japan. And again, that would limit the supply, that would raise prices, that would give less choice and less competition to American consumers. Those are all man-made trade barriers, all right? And those are all protectionist trade policies that a nation might put on in times of economic crisis like the Great Depression. And we are going to do those things. Then there's also natural barriers to trade. Anyone think of natural barriers to trade? Emily?
The ocean.
An ocean is absolutely a massive natural barrier. Anything that's coming from China to the United States has to go across an ocean. That costs money. That makes things more expensive than they would otherwise be. Surprises some kids. By far, who is the biggest trading partner of the United States? Canada. Okay, now we're going to make it easier on you. Who is the second biggest trading partner with the United States? Mexico. Then China. Then China. And that surprises a lot of you because of the rhetoric that we hear, but the reality is there are no trade barriers, or very limited, there are absolutely limited trade barriers, can't say no, between the United States and Mexico and China. First with an agreement made in the 1990s called NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, limited or got rid of all man-made trade barriers between these nations, and just our proximity makes geographic trade barriers insignificant, right? Yeah. China, you got to send stuff across an ocean. And there's a language barrier. Language is another trade barrier that people have to deal with.
In Mexico?
Well, yeah, but like.
Language.
Sure, but we've got a lot of Spanish speakers here. Okay, here, quiet please. Quiet. So the Great Depression is going to shake up. Guys, quiet please. The Great Depression is going to shake up the spirit of internationalism that was being felt in the 1920s, and it's going to make countries focus more on internal issues. Yes, ma'am? Oh, my goodness. That's a big question, right? And probably one that we can't answer here, but I think you guys talked a little bit about this last year, so there might be some notes. There's a lot of things that go into it. Essentially, the stock market crashed in 1929. I'm going to do like an absolute nutshell. For the same reason that the stock market, or the housing bubble took place in 2008. There was over-speculation. Speculation in economics means, I think that is going to be worth more tomorrow than it's worth today. Over-speculation is, I think that's going to be worth a lot more, and I'm going to keep pumping money into it because I really think that price is going to skyrocket, and it's going to continue to skyrocket. And eventually, the market corrects itself. It says, whoa, 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 whoa. These companies that we said were worth this, or those houses in 2008 that we said were worth this, they're not really worth that. They're not really that strong. They're not really that valuable. And people then start to get nervous, and then they start to sell their homes, try to sell their homes. And they might flood the market with homes. Well, law of supply and demand says when the market is flooded with people trying to sell their homes, the prices are going to drop. Or people can't afford their homes anymore because they were tied into wacky mortgages that were adjustable rates, and when the rates kicked up, they couldn't afford them anymore, and they had to walk out of their homes, and their homes went into foreclosure, and then they went at rock bottom prices. In 1929, companies were probably overvalued. And as people kept continuing to buy stocks, one reason. People were allowed to buy stocks, and they still are to some extent, to buy stocks what's called on the margin, which means you could essentially borrow money to pay for stocks, which is totally okay when markets are increasing. When the stock value is going up, if you borrow a little bit of money to buy the stock price goes up, eventually you can sell the stock and pay back the money you borrowed and make some money. That works okay. But when markets start to fall, and you've bought stocks with borrowed money, now you don't have anything to pay back those original loans for. So there's a lot of reasons that go into it. That's a couple, but basically over speculation. The market was probably bigger than it should have been. That we can talk more about this on another day, but stock market crashed. And that caused a ripple through the global markets, and it caused nations, rather than being more internationalist, to be more protectionist. The United States, for example, in 1930 is going to pass a major tariff bill called the Hawley-Smoot Tariff. Hawley, Hawley, dash, Smoot, Smoot, Hawley-Smoot Tariff, which is going to increase tariffs on imported goods to the United States. It's got a wacky name because Mr. and Mrs. Hawley and Mr. and Mrs. Smoot had children that went into Congress and wrote a bill. So it's named after the congressman. Yes?
What year was that again?
1930. It was one of the things that the United States tried to do to solve the problem of the Great Depression, and it was an absolute failure and made things worse. Because what can tariffs do? Make things even worse, make things even more expensive for people. So countries become more protectionist. And now we turn our story to East Asia. Very excited about this, all right. And Japan. And Japan. Japan is a rising power in the world, and they have been for now a few decades. You guys might remember from AP World History back in the day that in the 1890s, Japan fought a war against China and won. And that in 1904 and 1905, Japan fought a war against Russia and won.
And completely annihilated both of Russia's fleets, the Pacific and I believe the Baltic fleet.
I don't even know if that made it over in time. But anyway, let me continue. In World War I, Japan joined the Allies, and they fought against German holdings in Asia and took those. At the Treaty of Versailles, though, Japan didn't feel like it was treated as an equal partner. When we talk about the Big Four of Versailles, we're talking about the United States and Woodrow Wilson, and we're talking about France and Clemenceau, and we're talking about Britain and David Lloyd George, and we even talk about Italy and Vittorio Orlando. But no one mentions Japan in that. They weren't included. Japan felt that they were being mistreated. Japan felt it was because of race. A lot of it probably was. All right? By 1931, Japan is looking at a global Great Depression, and they're very nervous about it. Because Japan, just like the United States is very much blessed by geography, like we've got all the natural resources we could ever use, we've got oceans protecting us from our greatest threats in the world. Japan has a massive population with very little land, and they have very little resources for a growing industrial society. So Japan has to get those resources from elsewhere, especially natural resources like oil and steel. Well, steel's not a natural resource, but the coal and the iron. They're purchasing produced steel from the United States, for example. They get these resources from outside. But as we already said, during the Great Depression, what kind of economic policies are nations like the United States and Britain, what are they starting to do to their economies? They're becoming more protectionist, which makes Japan nervous. If these countries stop selling to us, if these countries decide to go totally insular, we could be left hanging. And we have a growing industrial society that needs these resources. So if we have concerns that we can't get them from other nations, we have to go out and find them on our own. And this is at the same time that Japan and the government of Japan is starting to be more and more heavily influenced by their military leaders. So the military, the Japanese military, is starting to exert more control over the Japanese government. In 1931, Japan will cook up an excuse to invade Manchuria. This is known as the Mukden Incident, M-U-K-D-E-N, the Mukden Incident. Japan's got a railroad company that's building rail lines in Manchuria. There's an explosion at the rail lines and some shots fired at some railroad workers in Manchuria. Japan blames China for this attack. Japan says we must protect our workers and our businesses in Manchuria, so they send in an army to protect. They essentially invade Manchuria. What they're really doing is taking over Manchuria. Now, in the era of the League of Nations, what should happen when a powerful country invades a weaker nation? The rest of the nation should step up and, would you let Ms. Fonison? The rest of the nation should step up to try to solve this problem. Yes. Mr. Shah. The rest of the nations should step up and try to take care of them, right? But here's a flaw in the League of Nations. There is no military apparatus of the League of Nations. If the League of Nations is going to sanction military action, it can only come from the member nations agreeing to use military action. And when Japan invades Manchuria, no nations are going to agree to use military action. Why? Yes, ma'am. Going through the Great Depression. Japan is a country that buys stuff from Britain. Japan is a country that buys stuff from the United States. Are you going to go to war with a country that you are heavily entrenched in business with? Maybe not. Give me another reason why Japan would not suffer military punishments from the League of Nations or any other nation. It's East Asia. We've got to, again, like, we love the wonderful diversity and the racial harmony that we live in, right? Where the United States has no problems with race or anything like that. Well, no, okay, we're not perfect. We're not perfect. But we've come a long way since 1931. The world and Western Europe and the United States has come a long way since 1931. In 1931, you were not going to get Americans or Britons or Frenchmen and all of these. What do the United States, politically speaking, what do the United States, Britain, and France all have in common that we need to remember?
They're white.
They're democracies. And they're majority white nations, but now we're talking politics. They're democracies. They're democracies. Which means their leaders, the people that decide whether we go to war or not, are elected in popular elections. So you have to make sure you are doing things that the people support. Remember, Woodrow Wilson doesn't get involved in World War I until after he's won his second election. Then he gets involved in the First World War. So the United States isn't going to send troops because American moms and dads don't want to send their sons to a war, because now we know what war is. And not only we don't want them to send them to a war, but we don't want to send them to a war on the other side of the planet to defend Manchurians. Nor do anyone in Britain, nor does anyone in France. They know what war is, and then you've got racist notions of why defend them. All right? The League of Nations will make a statement. They will tell Japan, this isn't cool, you need to leave. And Japan says, I'll leave the League of Nations. And Japan walks out of the League of Nations. Essentially saying to the League of Nations, you have no authority over me, and showing the world that the League of Nations can do nothing to stop aggressive powers. There you go. Questions, comments here? Now, the United States is in opposition to Japanese actions in Manchuria. All right? And in 1937, Japan is going to go even further and invade mainland China. In 1937, when Japan does with this, we start to aid China to resist the Japanese. And we start to place some limited embargoes on Japan. Try to economically punish Japan so they would maybe stop these military actions. But we would continue having trade with Japan up until December 7th of 1941. And that's one side note. Can I say one more thing, and will you hold that thought? We have to remember, too, the United States never joined the League of Nations, right? If the League of Nations agrees to use some military action, or even put strong economic sanctions against Japan, do we know what I mean when I say economic sanctions? Like economic punishments, embargoes, not selling, try to freeze them out of trade, try to hurt them in the wallet or in the pocketbook so they change their actions. If the League of Nations tried to impose those on Japan, are there any important economic powers and trade partners with Japan that aren't members of the League of Nations and wouldn't have to follow that? Us. Yeah. Us. Which makes a very interesting story. So even if the League of Nations could say, even if we do something, they can still trade with the United States, so it would have no bearing. So what are we going to do? And then it's going to just make the United States even stronger. Kind of the same story today, right? As Barack Obama is pushing to get this Iranian deal passed.
Which is the
We'll save political views. Let's talk later. Barack Obama is a strong advocate of getting this Iranian deal passed, the Iranian nuclear deal. And one of the arguments is, if we don't sign this, it's not a perfect agreement, he would say, but if we don't ratify this agreement, the other nations in Europe is. Europe's going to go through with it. Europe is going to end sanctions against Iran. And then we would be very much on our own. So what power would we have if the rest of the world is going to start doing business with Iran? So Barack Obama would say, it's the best option we have, because we have to try to stick with the rest of the world. We can't go it alone. We can't just punish Iran on our own. So the debates surrounding what to do about Iran and their nuclear programs right now, I see a strong parallel with what to do with Japan when they invade Manchuria. And the League of Nations is kind of impotent here because they don't have the United States with them. All right? Questions, comments, concerns? We can talk politically later when I stop recording, and then we can have it out there. Yes, ma'am. Caitlin, thank you. Eventually, we did business with China as well. What does every European and United States power recognize about China? Biggest population in the world. As Japan starts to expand, especially as they push into mainland China, we see the Japanese growing power as a threat, especially to countries that were also doing business in East Asia. So with Manchuria, it wasn't enough to push us to really do anything about it. But as they push into mainland China by 1937, we do start having some issues. But we don't completely freeze Japan out. We're trying to do this through negotiations, through conversation. All right. Yes, sir.
But also through, say the U.S. was to freeze Japan out, what if they, lose the source of income?
Yeah, absolutely. And what are we going through? We're going through our own depression. So we're like, chopping off our nose to spite our face or something. Yeah. All right. Benito Mussolini in Italy. Benito Mussolini. Mr. Peterson, he's staring right at you. Watch out. Benito Mussolini is the fascist dictator of Italy from the early 1920s up into World War II. Fascist. That's a good word we're going to hear a lot. A fascist is somebody you don't like. I kid. There's actually a better definition, but today the word fascist pretty much gets thrown around for anybody that you don't like. Okay, people of opposite sides of the political spectrum are often called fascists, despite what the original fascists really were. So today it's often used for people you don't like. The original fascist, the word fascist, gets its name from Benito Mussolini and his fascist party. The fasces is an old, Roman tool or weapon where you take a bunch of sticks and you bind them together and you put an axe head on it, and now that is strong. So it's symbolic in that if there is one stick, it is very weak and you can break it. But when you bundle a bunch of sticks together and bind them together, then it becomes a formidable weapon. The fascist party of Benito Mussolini and later of Adolf Hitler, Nazi, we're going to just give an easy definition of fascism here. We are going to combine ultra-nationalism with aggressive foreign policy and strong oversight of business. So when you combine ultranationalism, like my country über alles, with aggressive foreign policy, because, and notice how this is linked, right? Like, hey, we're stronger than our neighbors, so we're going to be aggressive towards them. With a strong government oversight and orchestration of the economy. Not government ownership of the economy. We're not going into like purely socialist or communist territory here, but strong government oversight over industry.
I was going to say, like, fascists and Nazis hate communists.
The fascists and the Nazis hated communists, but in their origin, and it's in many cases, like the hatred is spawned because they're in the beginning. They're like trying to bring in the same people. Benito Mussolini was a socialist before he was a fascist. So it's a little bit of a more convoluted story than that. So we're combining ultranationalism with aggressive foreign policy and strong oversight of business. All right? Benito Mussolini rises to power in the early 1920s in Italy. But in the 1930s, of course, like the rest of the world, Italy is suffering from the Great Depression. In 1935, Benito Mussolini, in order to expand his empire, aggressive foreign policy, in order to express Italian supremacy, is going to make a move on one of only two independent nations left in the continent of Africa. One is Ethiopia here, or Abyssinia, as it was referred to in the 1930s and before. Abyssinia. Anybody know the other remaining independent nation in Africa in the 1930s? Not Egypt. No. The United States had a part to play in the creation of this country. Liberia in West Africa, actually. So most of Africa has been taken over by European powers. We notice here, Italy's already got control of a territory called Eritrea. They've already got control of Italian Somaliland. British Somalia, Italian Somaliland, put it together as today's Somalia. He wants to move in and take Abyssinia. And now, just a little blast from the past. You guys might recall when you were in 10th grade studying for the AP World exam and you were doing a practice DBQ, you might remember one DBQ about African actions and reactions to European colonialism. Yeah, we remember this. Or not. And there was a series of documents, and one of the documents had a drawing, like a wood carving drawing, from a battle in Ethiopia between Italians and Ethiopians, and that was representing the Battle of Adowa, A-D-O-W-A. This is in the 1890s, where Italy tried to expand and take over Ethiopia, and they were defeated. So, as my ultra-nationalist Italian Benito Mussolini would say, we need to avenge that defeat. We need to rally Italians behind this cause. And so in 1935, Italy will invade Abyssinia. In 1935, you're not supposed to do such things, Italy. The League of Nations is supposed to stop you, but what has the League of Nations already proven? Not doing anything, right? So, Benito Mussolini moves in. The League of Nations gives lip service again. They just talk. They say, Italy, stop. The Emperor of Ethiopia, the Emperor of Abyssinia, a guy named Haile Selassie, who is another interesting figure that you guys may have heard of or may want to read about. Today, the Rastafarian religion views Haile Selassie as a Christ figure and worships him as a deity. But in the 1930s, Haile Selassie was the Emperor of Abyssinia. Haile Selassie will go to the League of Nations, and he will say, League of Nations, my Christian brothers, Haile Selassie in Ethiopia, it was a Christian nation. My Christian brothers, you need to support us. You need to step up and defend us. And the League of Nations didn't. For all the same reasons that the League of Nations did nothing about Japan. All right? They've got their own economic problems. Nobody wants to go to war. We know what war is. And are we, especially in democratic nations, going to send our sons to die in war in Africa to defend Africans in 1935? Probably not. It's not going to get any popular support. All right? So the League of Nations does nothing. Italy takes over Abyssinia. And again, the results of this, what do we learn about aggressive powers? They can do whatever they want. There's no stopping. Again, Italy is told to leave Abyssinia by the League of Nations. Italy says, yeah, I'll leave. The League of Nations. All right. Also in the midst of this, in 1936, Italy and Germany will sign an agreement called the Rome-Berlin Axis. The Rome-Berlin Axis. That's where we get that word Axis powers from World War II. An axis is something that everything else rotates around, right? The Earth rotates on its axis. So they're at the center, they're at the heart. So now we have an agreement between Germany and Italy. Everybody good? Yes, sir.
How do you spell
Haile Selassie, I believe it is Haile Selassie. Excellent. Thank you, sir.